A girl gave her only meal of the day to an elderly man sitting on a park bench. The man appeared frail, his hands trembling as he clutched at his shabby jacket. His distant, unfocused eyes seemed lost in a fog, and Maya couldn't shake the feeling that he had nowhere to go and no one waiting for him. Her stomach growled loudly as she looked down at the sandwich her mother had packed for her, a simple slice of bread with peanut butter, but the thought of eating it while he sat there hungry made her feel sick. "You should have this," she said, stepping closer and holding out the sandwich. Her voice was soft but steady, as if she were willing the man to hear the kindness behind her words. The man's gaze sharpened as he looked up at her, a faint smile breaking through the lines of confusion on his face. "Thank you, child," he whispered, his voice cracking. He reached out with shaky hands to take the sandwich. Maya noticed how thin his fingers were, the veins standing out starkly against his papery skin. For a moment, he just stared at the sandwich, as if it were the most precious gift in the world. Then he unwrapped it carefully, savoring the smell before taking a small, deliberate bite. Maya stepped back, unsure of what to do. She wanted to ask if he was okay, if he needed help, but the words caught in her throat. He seemed so fragile, like the weight of the world had pressed him into this bench and left him there. Finally, she said, "Take care of yourself, okay?" The man nodded faintly, his mouth full, and Maya turned to leave. Her stomach churned with hunger, but a small warmth bloomed in her chest as she walked away. She didn't know if she'd made a difference, but, at least, he wasn't hungry for now. Maya hurried through the streets of Elmwood, her patched-up backpack bouncing against her shoulders. Her shoes scuffed loudly against the cracked pavement, the soles nearly worn through. She felt the sharp pinch of her feet pressing against the thin fabric of her sneakers, but she ignored it. Home wasn't far now, and she needed to get back before her mother started to worry. The apartment complex loomed ahead, its faded brick walls streaked with grime. The air smelled of mildew and rust, and the stairs creaked ominously as Maya climbed them, avoiding the broken step on the third floor out of habit. Inside their tiny apartment, her mother was seated at the kitchen table, her head bent over a stack of bills. The dim overhead light flickered, casting shadows across her tired face. "You're late," her mother said without looking up. "Sorry, Ma," Maya replied, dropping her backpack by the door. She hesitated, debating whether to tell her mother about the man in the park. She decided against it. Her mother had enough to worry about without hearing how her daughter had given away the only meal they could spare. "I'll get started on my homework." Her mother sighed heavily, rubbing her temples. "We need to talk about the electricity bill. If we can't pay it by the end of the week, they're going to shut us off again." Maya swallowed hard and nodded. She opened her tattered math book and tried to focus, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the man in the park. Was he still there? Did he have somewhere to sleep tonight? Her stomach growled again, but she ignored it, burying herself in equations she didn't fully understand. The next morning, Maya woke up early. Her mother had left a note on the counter. "Work overtime tonight. Make sure you eat something before school. Love you." Maya stared at the note for a long moment before grabbing her backpack and heading out. There wasn't much to eat in the kitchen anyway. As she walked through the park, her eyes automatically scanned for the elderly man, but the bench where he'd been sitting was empty. A pang of worry shot through her, but she shook it off. Maybe he'd found his way home. Maybe he had a family waiting for him after all. She was almost past the park when a sleek black car pulled up to the curb, its engine purring softly. Maya stopped in her tracks, her breath catching as the driver's side door opened. A tall man in a sharp suit stepped out, his polished shoes clicking against the pavement. He scanned the park before his gaze landed on her. "Maya?" he called, his voice deep but kind. Maya's heart raced. She clutched the strap of her backpack tightly. "Yes?" she answered hesitantly. The man smiled faintly and stepped closer, holding out a hand. "My name is Mr. Bennett. You helped my father yesterday. He hasn't stopped talking about you." Maya blinked, confused. "Your father?" "Yes," Mr. Bennett said, his smile softening. He's been struggling lately. Alzheimer's. He wandered off yesterday, and I couldn't find him. If it weren't for you..." His voice trailed off, and he shook his head. "You showed him kindness when he needed it most." Maya's cheeks flushed. I didn't do much. Just gave him my lunch. That's more than most people would have done, Mr. Bennett said. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope, holding it out to her. I'd like to thank you. Maya stared at the envelope, her heart pounding. I can't take that, she said, shaking her head. We don't take charity. It's not charity, Mr. Bennett said gently. It's gratitude. Please, Maya, take it. Reluctantly, Maya reached out and took the envelope. It felt heavy in her hands, and she didn't need to open it to know it contained more money than she and her mother had seen in months. Thank you, she murmured, still unsure if this was the right thing to do. If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to call me. Mr. Bennett handed her a business card, then gave her a small nod and walked back to his car. Maya watched as the sleek vehicle pulled away, her mind racing. At home, her mother was in the kitchen, trying to stretch a bag of rice and a can of beans into dinner. Maya hesitated in the doorway before pulling the envelope from her backpack. Ma, she said softly. Her mother turned, her eyes widening as she saw the envelope in Maya's hands. What's that? Maya explained everything. The man in the park, Mr. Bennett, the money. Her mother's face was a mixture of shock, gratitude, and unease. We can't take this, she said, shaking her head. I can't accept this without doing something in return. The next day, her mother called the number on Mr. Bennett's card. He met them at a cafe in town, his warm smile putting them at ease. After a brief conversation, he offered her mother a part-time administrative job at his office, promising flexible hours and fair pay. Her mother accepted reluctantly, but Maya could see the relief in her eyes. The days that followed felt like a whirlwind. Maya's mother started her new job, and the electricity was reconnected. The fridge had more than just scraps, and for the first time in months, there was a sense of stability in their lives. Maya walked through the park each morning with her head held a little higher, her patched-up shoes feeling a little lighter. At school, things didn't change immediately. The mocking comments from the other kids still stung, but Maya learned to ignore them. She had more important things to focus on now, like her schoolwork and the extra shifts she'd started picking up at the local diner. She wanted to help her mother as much as possible. One afternoon, as she walked home from school, she passed the garage where she sometimes helped out. Miss Walker, the owner, waved her over. Hey, Maya, she called, wiping her hands on a rag. Got a minute? Maya nodded, stepping into the garage. The smell of oil and grease was familiar and comforting. Miss Walker leaned against the workbench, studying Maya with a thoughtful expression. You've got a good head on your shoulders, she said. How would you feel about learning more around here? I could use an apprentice. Maya's eyes widened. You mean, like a real apprenticeship? Miss Walker nodded. It won't be easy, but I think you've got what it takes. Maya felt a surge of excitement. I'd love that. Thank you, Miss Walker. Don't thank me yet, Miss Walker said with a chuckle. You've got a lot to learn. Maya threw herself into the apprenticeship with determination. She spent her afternoons at the garage, learning everything she could about cars, while her evenings were devoted to homework and helping her younger brother, Noah, with his schoolwork. Her mother's job with Mr. Bennett grew into a full-time position, and they finally started catching up on their bills. The elderly man in the park never reappeared, but Maya often thought about him. She hoped he was safe, that he was being cared for. In a way, his presence in her life had been a turning point, a reminder that small acts of kindness could ripple outward and change everything. One night, as Maya lay in bed, listening to the hum of their refrigerator and the faint laughter of her brother playing in the next room, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. The future wasn't guaranteed, but for the first time it felt possible, and that was enough.